I have a few minutes here. I just can't help but tell you a little bit about the seeing eye. I don't know which is the most marvelous. The hearing ear or the seeing eye. I do know the Lord has made both of them. That's a wonderful piece of equipment you got there that you're peeping with right now. There's a clear glass window here called the cornea. It's as clear as crystal. Doesn't have any blood vessels in it. Over here it has blood vessels, but the Lord knew better to put blood vessels in this area where you're looking through. And that's really part of your skin. If you come down over the forehead, up under the eyelid, down across the eye, it's all really related to skin in the embryo, except this skin's as clear as crystal. Isn't it great if you're going to have an eye to look, you have a window to look through? Wouldn't it be ridiculous to have a window and no eye to look through it, a window in your skin? And then you see the colored part of the eye. That's the diaphragm. That's like the diaphragm on a camera. It opens and closes. It's all automatic. You don't have to set the f-stops, as you look around. It's all automatic. And then in the middle is the pupil. And when you look in here at the iris and the pupil, you're really looking at someone's brain, because it's part of the brain. And, the Hebrews in the Old Testament knew about the pupil. They didn't call it the pupil. They called it the apple, because it was the shape of the apple. And you've heard this expression, you're the apple of my eye. Isn't it great to be the apple of somebody's eye? I was the apple of my dad's eye. Well, that expression comes from the Bible, because you see the Lord referring to Israel, and I believe ultimately in referring to all of us, since believers are children of Israel. He says that as they were in the desert wandering, He encircled him, He instructed him, He kept him as the apple of His eye. That's where the expression comes from. It comes from God. And King David, when he was being hounded and chased, prayed that the Lord would indeed keep him as the apple of His eye. He says, keep me as the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings. Now, why do we have the expression, keep me as the apple of your eye? The word keep here should perhaps best be translated protect. We call a place we put something to protect it a keep. And so what the Lord is really saying is that He will protect us as the apple of the eye. What does that mean? Well, if anything gets anywhere near your cornea to touch it, you'll blink. It's automatic. You don't have to think about it. It's a reflex. In fact, this reflex is so powerful, it's the last reflex to be lost at the time of death. Emergency medical technicians, if somebody is deeply comatose, they'll touch a little piece of cloth to the cornea right over the pupil, and if they don't blink, they're probably gone. The Lord wants you to understand that you're not merely the apple of His eye, as we use the expression, not knowing exactly what we mean, except we're very fond of something. But that He is protecting us as we might understand that we protect the apple of our eye, reflexively to the death, even the death of Jesus Christ. Well, there is a fellow by the name of Sir Duke Elder, who is, I would say, Mr. I. He's written a multi-volume set of books that you can find in most medical school libraries. And Sir Stuart Duke Elder, an Englishman, wrote a book in this series called The Eye and Evolution. And in the book, he says that unless you're willing to engage in a lot of speculation and what have you, he says there's been a lot of thought that have been put on the subject of the origin of the eye, the vertebrate eye, with its inverted retina and everything. And he says that up to now, it's a problem that is as yet unsolved. This is in a book called The Eye and Evolution. I wouldn't have even brought this up, except he goes further than that. He says not only is it unsolved, but assuming you don't want to get involved with a lot of useless speculation, he says it seems little likelihood that we'll ever find a solution. So you got the picture? He says we don't know anything about the origin of the eye, point one. Point two, he doesn't think we're ever going to know anything about the evolution of the eye. This is amazing. Did I forget to tell you that this book is 843 pages long? 843 pages to say we know nothing, we never will know nothing about the eye. Now, I'm pretty long-winded. I'd have gotten this across 600-700 pages easy. But evolutionists are convinced that not only was the eye not created, it occurred by chance, and so having occurred by chance is not the least bit surprising. It's a piece of junk. Poorly made. Frank Zendler, who has a website, you can look this up for yourself. He's a retired professor like me, only he takes the evolutionary side of things, and he says that although the human eye would be a scandal if it were the result of divine deliberation, It would be a scandalous God who made such an eye. He says there is a plausible evolutionary explanation of its absurd construction. You've heard of Richard Dawkins, wrote The Blind Watchmaker. That man knows more things that aren't true than perhaps anyone alive. He says, any engineer would naturally assume that the photocells would point towards the light with their wires leading backwards towards the brain. In other words, that the light-sensitive cells would face out towards the light, not the other direction. It sounds pretty good so far to me. He would laugh at any suggestion that the photocells might point away from the light. Wow, do they point away from the light? They really do. All mammals, all vertebrates, the retina is then upside down. Years ago, I used to work with a sheet film camera. It shows you how old I am. We had these big old press cameras that had the bellows, and you had to put the sheets of film in, load them in a holder. You did it in the dark, and it was quite easy to put the film in upside down. So the back of the film was towards the light rather than the front. And then you went out and you took all these pictures you never get again. You go into the darkroom, you develop them. You end up with about 200 ukulele picks. I mean, that's about all you get out of it. The film's then upside down. Well, that does it right there. Obviously, an evolutionist wouldn't even think of studying a retina to try to understand why it might be advantageous to have the film in upside down. He can afford to just ignore it. And this leads to bad science. Because if you ignore evolution and just press right on ahead and say, if the Lord did it, I know it's got to be, there just has to be a reason. Oh, well, you find the reasons. I could do an hour on this alone. Let's just back up a bit. The eye develops as a little ball that comes off the brain. This is the brain in the embryo. We're not talking evolution now. A little bud comes out. It's hollow. The ball gets pushed in sort of like an empty basketball here. And this will form the eyeball here. The iris diaphragm will be at this edge and that edge. This will be the retina, the inner layer. And this outer layer will be the choroid, which has a lot of pigment and blood vessels in our body. And in the middle is a space. And these two stick together. And God put them together so that they would stay together. But after the fall, just like marriages and everything else, they start coming apart. And we call that a detached retina. So we can see the beauty of God's creation. And right over the top of it, we see the effects of sin. It's beautiful, but something's gone wrong. It's like running a Rolls Royce out of oil. Marvelous automobile, but it's really damaged now. And what about the cornea? The cornea was really part of the skin out here. And what about the lens? It was a little bud that budded off the skin to make the lens. So the two parts are of completely different developmental sources, the eye versus the lens and cornea. So there's the developing retina. This is the developing lens. Let's move on and look at both of those. First, the retina. This is all the film in the camera right here. It's called the retina, and it's drawn very thick here so you can see it, but it's much thinner than a sheet of paper. And if we look at a piece of the retina, magnify an area like you see in the blue rim, here's a picture under the microscope of the retina, and these are ganglion cells just like you'd see in the brain. The light comes in from above, and down at the bottom are the light-sensitive cells called photoreceptors, and sure enough, their photoreceptive ends are way down here. If you're the light, they're facing this way. And so the evolutionist says, forget about it. This is bad design. Don't even worry asking why this might be optimum. Now, your first clue that the evolutionists don't know exactly the proper answer here comes from the fact that there is a group of animals that have the retinas in right, according to evolutionary principles, with the cells facing to the front. And that's the cephalopods, like the octopus. And that's why, when you talk about somebody having particularly sharp vision, you say not that they're eagle-eyed, that would be an upside-down retina, you say they're octopus-eyed, right? Or did I get that wrong? No, you see, this is silly. An eagle can sit up in a tree and can see a fish just under the surface of the water a mile away with an upside-down retina. And I have never heard that or anyone claim that an octopus has vision that comes even close to that. Now, just behind these light-sensitive cells, we have a pigment layer. And this pigment layer is just full of blood vessels. Now, that begins to explain why the retina is arranged as it is. And by the way, this retina is sensitive to a single photon of light. One photon. How much can you improve on that? You say, well, if it was put together right, and it was the right side around, maybe it would see sharper. Well, the resolution is limited by the optics, the lens and the cornea, not by the retina. The retina is better than the lens and cornea when it comes to resolution. So you can't improve on it by simply moving things around, but you can be sure there are reasons that it is the way it is. Let's look at that. Here's a drawing, makes things a little clearer. These are the light-sensitive cells, the rods and the cones. The cones see color, the others see kind of more black and white. And the ends of these cells, the ends of the photoreceptors, called the outer segments, are the most metabolically active tissues in the body. They have to be replaced every 7 days. You're burning them out. And when they're replaced, they're just shed right off the end of the cell, so you've got a bunch of trash here. What do you plan on doing with that trash? You have to have cells ready to eat it up and digest it, called macrophages. And you don't want those cells in the way of your vision. So by having it backwards, as the outer segments turn over, the cells that digest them are in this next layer out here. The other advantage is that when light comes down through the retina, it's very important that the last thing it does is fire this light-sensitive part of the photoreceptor. After that, the light must be trapped in the pigment. If it were to reflect off non-pigment things and come back through the retina, you'd burn out your retinas faster than 7 days. And so that's a good reason to have this pigment right here. But the best reason of all the retinas upside down is about 95% of the blood coming to the retina is in this layer back here. These are not merely blood vessels. This is a lake of blood. 5% of the blood's on top of the retina. So you actually have to look through 5% of the blood to see. How would you like to look through 95% of the blood? It's a blood sandwich because of the metabolic activity here. So having it in there backwards is optimum. You can't improve on it. In fact, to give you an idea how great it is, several years ago, a neurophysiologist published an article in Bite, and he was trying to simulate what the retina is actually doing, the signal processing going on in the retina. He says to simulate 10 milliseconds, that's 10 thousandths of a second, of the complete processing of even a single nerve cell from the retina would require the solution of about 500 simultaneous nonlinear differential equations 100 times, and would take at least several minutes of processing time on a Cray supercomputer. This computer is so big and so expensive, the Cray company doesn't own one of their own computers. Government buys them. He says, keeping in mind that there are 10 million or more such cells interacting with each other in complicated ways, it would take a minimum of 100 years of Cray time to simulate what takes place in your eye many times every second. What do you figure? Chance on that one? And what about those blood vessels you're looking through? 5% are in front. That's a little worrisome, isn't it? As you look at me up here, you are looking through a skein of capillaries. When the ophthalmologist or the physician takes that scope and looks into your eye, you ever wonder what they see in there? Old movies or whatever? This is what he or she sees. They see these capillaries, and you are looking right through them. And you don't see them. And the reason you don't see them is because if the retina is like this sheet of paper, and it is, it's thinner than paper, the capillaries are like fingers right over the top of it. And they're making a shadow on the retina. And you should see this, but you don't, because the brain has been taught the following little principle. If it doesn't move, ignore it. And so wherever the eye looks, these vessels just go along with it, and the shadow doesn't move on the retina. You say, but wait a minute, you can see this stand here, it's not moving, how come? Or how is that so? Well, the muscles of the eye cause the eyeball to tremor at a high frequency. And so your visual field is moving on your retina all the time, and that's why you can see it. If the muscles of your eyeball were to become paralyzed, you couldn't see anything unless it moved. And this happens to some people, so we know that this is true. But the movement of the eyeball doesn't affect the capillaries because they move with the eyeball. Does that make sense? so you don't see your own blood capillaries. Now, you could see your own blood capillaries if you could make the shadow move. That brings up another cheap experiment. One of these days I have to do a book on cheap experiments. The next picture I'm going to show you is, by general agreement, the most interesting of all the pictures that I show. Each of you are going to see your own retinal blood vessels by making a little tiny hole and looking through it. And don't do this, please. I see people out there saying, is this it? No. It must be the littlest hole you can make with your finger and still see through it. You will close the other eye, look through the little hole. Now, this is the next principle. You must move the hole left and right, not front and back, left and right, and you must do so at a fast speed, like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, left and right. Do that while looking at the white screen up there, and you will see little grayish silver lines start to appear. These are your own retinal blood vessels. Each of you will see your own retinal blood vessels up here on the screen. Those that don't see them, what can I say? Blind as a bat. How many can see the retinal blood vessels on the screen? Isn't this great? Cheap experiment. You can do it with a pen light. You can just walk up to a white wall. And these are the muscles that move the eye, by the way. You have a muscle on the top, a muscle on the bottom, a muscle towards the nose, and a muscle away from the nose. When this muscle contracts, your eyeball looks up. When this one contracts, your eyeball looks down. This one contracts, the eyeball looks this way, towards the nose, this one away. Got the picture? That's easy. But there's 6 muscles, not 4. There's one on the top that doesn't quite fit in. It has to run front to back inside the orbit, has to send its tendon through, so help me, a pulley. It's a gorgeous little pulley. I've seen it many times. You have to be careful. You just touch it. It breaks when you're dissecting the body. And the tendon goes through there, and it attaches to the eye. And when that muscle contracts, the eyeball rotates this way. And there's a muscle on the bottom. When that contracts, the eyeball rotates the other way. So our eyeballs do this. Isn't this great? As well as up and down and left. You're probably asking, why does the Lord give us eyeballs that do this? Is this so junior high boys can gross out girls in the classroom? No, unlike the muscles that move your eye up and down and left and right, you don't have control over these muscles to rotate. The Lord did not want you grossing out the girls in the classroom. What they're for is that He knows you'll be turning your head from side to side like this, possibly when you're walking. You know, your head does a little bit of weaving back and forth. And if your field of view is rotating, you'll get sick. Lord knows that. So it's all under muscular control so that as you tip your head, the eyeballs rotate to stay right side up. Now, here's a cheap experiment. When we're all done here, get together with somebody at the table, look deeply into their eyes. We've had some really nice relationships grow out of this. Look into their eyes, see a little spot on the iris diaphragm, and have them tip their head, and you'll see their eyes are rotating, staying right side up. Now, don't try standing on your head. The eye says you have no business going from shoulder to shoulder. That's it. Okay, well, there's so many wonderful things we could say about the eye. There's only one spot in the eye right here where we see things clearly. The light comes in, and just in this spot can we see things sharply. Everywhere else, it's not quite so sharp. If you look at me, I'm in focus, but everything else is out of focus. Isn't that true? We call this the fovea centralis, or the macula. And I've heard people say, well, that shows there's no creator. I mean, if there was a creator that knew what he was doing, he'd have the whole retina sharp. When you looked, everything would be in focus. Think about it. You pick up the Wall Street Journal or whatever it is you read these days, and if every single letter on both pages were all equally sharp at once, and all of them for all practical purpose saying, pick me to read, you couldn't concentrate. We're too limited. As I look out in the audience, I can only see one of you at a time. If I look at the whole crowd, I see you all, but you're blurred. But I can see each of you individually. And the Lord knows we can only deal with people personally on an individual basis. He doesn't have a fovea. He can see you all at once. He can see you wherever you're at any time, in the mountains or in the bottom of the ocean or wherever. But we're limited. And we have a limited area of sharpness. And God wants us to, yes, deal with people at large, but focus on people individually. And that's the way we see. Well, my favorite part of the eye is the lens. Here it is. The lens is rubbery. It's beautifully clear like crystal, only it's flexible. And there are cells that grow on the surface of the lens, and as they grow, they're like those cells in the canal of the ear. They slide along the surface all the way over to the equator. And at the equator, they turn into the lens. And when they do this, a little tiny dot, it would be one of these cells, it starts elongating like pulling an antenna out of a car. One end goes way up to the center of the lens, and the other end goes all the way back here to the center of the lens like a big bow. And so each of these little box-like cells, when it turns into the eye, having passed across the front, becomes elongated to make a long prism, and these are flexible like rubber. And so the lens can focus not like a camera lens by going forward and backward. It focuses by changing the actual refraction of the lens, changing its shape. It's much faster. Hey, and it's all automatic. The Lord could have said, I don't know how much more I can do for you. I've given you a wonderful eye. I'll give you a focusing mechanism. It'll be just like binoculars. We'll put a little roller on the top of your nose, and everywhere you look, you just focus. It'll be great. You wouldn't get anything else done. But it's all automatic, and it's held in there with strings. Little tubules that are hollow. I thought that was a nice touch, a hollow tube. Just little fine things that are attached. And when they pull, they flatten the lens so you can see at a distance. And when they relax, they come up close so you can see up close. Let's just look at that lens in the microscope. Here are those little cells I was telling you about. They're like boxes, and at the edge they turn into the lens, and then they become elongated. That's where you see these long lines. The nuclei actually die. The cell is dead inside the lens, and these dead cells are with you for the rest of your life. And since the fall, they cease to be rubbery later on. They get hard, and your lens doesn't focus anymore. That's not the way the Lord planned it and designed it. That's the way it is now. And if we take the scanning electron microscope and magnify the Lord again, that's the way these cells look inside. They look like boards in a lumber yard. They're perfectly stacked. And the reason they keep each one of those boards would be a single cell that has lost its nucleus. It's full of a protein called crystalline. It's the most protein-rich cell in the body. It's as clear as glass, and if you crank up the power on that, they're locked together by thousands and thousands of ball and socket interlocks. What sort of God do we have? When he says he can do something, just bet on it. He can do anything he wants to do. If I'm ever privileged to walk the decks of Noah's Ark, that'll be the second best evidence I have for Noah's Ark. The best evidence is the Word of God, pure and simple. Now, you look at the simple organisms on Earth, they have lenses too. The trilobites are supposed to be among the first to have evolved. They have compound eyes like insects. They have a lens, but the lens of the trilobite, or at least some of them, is a hard crystalline substance, just like glass in the lenses of your glasses. These glass lenses are made of calcite, and the orientation of the prisms in the calcite is perpendicular to the surface. Here is one of these trilobites. You can see the eye on either side. We crank up the power on it. Here are the individual lenses. Because these lenses are mineral, a calcite, you can actually find fossils of trilobites. The lenses are probably in the same shape they were when the trilobite was alive, because it's a mineral. And they can remove the individual trilobite lenses from this particular species and look through it in the microscope, and they find out it has optical properties that keep it in focus without having to change shape from about 1 millimeter to infinity. That's the thickness of a dime out to infinity. And this is a wonderfully corrected lens. In fact, it took man a long time, using principles of optics and physics, to ever come up with a lens as good as this lens. How do we know that? Because the first really superb lenses were made by Descartes and Huygens. Doing advanced mathematical calculations, they knew it took two different kinds of glass, and you had to change the interface. This is called a doublet, to get a highly corrected lens. The lens of Descartes just happens to be the lens found in this trilobite. And the lens of Huygens is found in this trilobite. What sort of a creator do we have? And finally, let's just look at the eyelids. This is a good place to close. Huh? We have window washers. Naturally, the Lord gave us window washers. You have to keep the cornea wet. You couldn't even see if the cornea wasn't wet, because that's really the optical surface, is the water, not the cornea. And the water comes from the outer edge of the eyes across the eye, And over here, there's a little hole, look close in the mirror, on each eyelid near the nose called the puncta. There are muscles in there that suck the water off the eye. So it's constantly flowing. The washer fluid is optimized to be antibactericidal and just perfect for the eye. And have you been topping up the fluid lately? See, it's all automatic, don't worry about it. And then the lids have a little cartilage, it's a little stiff plate that's inside the lid, and then there are muscles attached to that, and the muscles can then raise and lower the lid like this so you can blink at people, see? If I use those muscles, and they're skeletal muscles, right, because you have voluntary control, don't you? You can open your eyelids, so those are skeletal muscles, and if you use that muscle to hold the eyelid open and you look and you look and you look and you look, do you see a problem here? You're going to get fatigued. And when you get fatigued, that eyelid's going to droop. The Lord knows about this. So he gives you a second muscle called the muscle of Mueller. I wish I had discovered it. Could have been the muscle of Menton. Here is the second muscle right here. Can you see it up there? That's smooth muscle, not skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle has the advantage. It's not under voluntary control, and it can just sit and contract all day long and not get tired. That's the kind we have in our stomach, intestinal tract, what have you. And so we have smooth muscle to hold the lid up on the long haul, and then attached to that in tandem, we have skeletal muscle so we can blink at people. That's the kind of detail the Lord has in mind. Well, we talked about those tear glands, and here they are. They produce the water that flows across the eye. There's a lipid barrier at the eyelid to keep the water from coming over onto the cheek. The excess water goes into the little pumps. The pumps pump it down into the nose. And into the nose it's released, and that's why we get the sniffles when we cry. But if the water builds up too greatly, it breaks over the dam and goes down the cheeks as tears. And that's what the Lord has come to solve. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things are passed away.